Welcome to episode 3 of the In Between Classes podcast. I'm your host, Will Gottlieb, joined here by our co-host, Josh Schmidt. Josh, how's it going?
It's not going bad at all, other than Jimmy Butler, but I don't want to talk about that yet.
Other than Jimmy Butler, we'll get to that at the end of it. So that's a little bit of tease. That's a bit of a tease there for anybody that wants to stick around for a little sports talk at the end of this. But the main topic that we are focusing on in this episode of the podcast is motivation. And we'll touch on it in a bunch of different fashions. Mostly we'll start with what motivates students. Then we'll get into what doesn't motivate students. And we'll wrap it up with what motivates us as teachers. So, keeping that in mind, we'll start with what motivates students. And Josh, I know you have some thoughts on this, particularly when it comes to the model of your classroom, when it comes to pacing, leveling, and choice. So, I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on student motivation?
Yes, and actually one of the reasons why Will and I wanted to do the podcast in general is because we have a very similar feeling on what a math classroom can look like. The entire reason why you want a self-paced, leveled, or a choice-based classroom is because it creates a motivating environment for students. And as it turns out, you can't teach want to. A student who is motivated to do well on content is always going to do better than that equivalent student who is not motivated or is forced to, or it's just this thing that the teacher tells them to do. So with each one individually, pacing is motivating to students because you give them clear goals. Being able to tell a kid, this assignment is due on Tuesday, this assignment is due on Wednesday, this assignment is due on Thursday, and so on, allows them to see a little bit farther into the future. So it's no longer, I have problems 21 through 30 to do by tomorrow. It's a little bit more of, I need to learn proportions by Thursday because I have to move on to the next skill. When that comes into play, though, is you can start using students who move quickly. You can give them more interesting options inside of the content. So, for example, a lot of my students who move quickly are given more challenging, deeper level concepts. A lot of times they're given games. I love difficult and challenging games because I feel like that's one of the quickest and easiest ways with middle school students to give them something that is time-consuming but difficult and worth their time. So, Will, what do you think about with high school students? Because I know like a game-based philosophy works really well with the age that I have. How would you try to use some of the pacing and choice options with high school kids?
When it comes to games specifically, I think it'd be great. I mean, I don't see why a high schooler would react any differently to getting a game for assignment than a middle schooler would. I mean, it's just something fun and more engaging than a worksheet. So having that choice of a game as opposed to a worksheet would be more motivating, I think. The tough thing when it comes to high school, though, is finding worthwhile games that actually cover the material. Like I said, I'm not a teacher yet, so I haven't looked into this stuff too in detail, but I'm assuming if there were game options out there, it would be more visible in the classrooms that I've been in, where it's super visible in middle school classrooms like yours and others, because it is easier to base a game on middle school level math standards. Whereas, I mean, how are you going to make a game out of the angle side relationship theorem in geometry? I mean, that's how I see it. So it would be great if you could motivate kids by giving them games at a high school level. It's just much more difficult to do so. When it goes back to the pacing aspect of it, I wanted to ask you, so you say if you see a student that is moving ahead quickly, they are just rolling through content, they understand the material, so then you say you'll give them something more challenging. And again, you try and make it a challenging game, but still it's something that's more challenging. Do you find that a student will be like, well, why would I move ahead? I'm just going to be given more material. Like, why don't I just stay on pace so I get regular, or not regular, so I get minimum level difficulty?
You're absolutely right. That is a huge concern. And I would say I spent probably 3 or 4 years with that being my primary concern. The kids that I would always say that can move a day or two ahead of the minimum speed. Fast enough that they get left alone, but slow enough that I know and they know that they're not working as hard as they could otherwise. A couple strategies that I used is kids create their own schedules in my class. So if you start a week a day ahead, your schedule then reacts to that. Like, you can't just take an extra day at the end of the week and fall back to the minimum speed. So a lot of times when kids are pushed ahead of content, usually through pre-assessments and things like that, they have to stay ahead of the content. And eventually that the pull to stay closer to the main group disappears a little bit. So that's one of the things that I do. The other one is I try to reward them with inherently interesting things. And that's something you can do when you know your kids really well. Something that is also easier at middle school than high school is coming up with truly real-world math projects is definitely easier at the middle school level. So my kids will... If I have an artistic kid, we'll do like the action figure project where they design a prototype of an action figure of themselves. That's a really nice project to work on scale factor and proportions that I say you can only do this option if you are ahead of the pace. So I have that a lot. I have options built into the choice boards of this is only available for students who are this many days ahead. And then I try to just react to that as much as possible. But the truth is, and I was just talking about, Will, before we got on here, behavioral problems frequently need behavioral solutions. So if there is a kid who is not working as hard as they can and they need a kick in the butt to work a little bit harder, you need to identify, is that a behavioral problem that needs a behavioral solution, or maybe the kid is struggling when they're not working with their peers. There's a lot of students who do really well in small groups and do very poorly individually. So it's important to identify which of those problems.
Okay, so again, it comes back to your motivating aspect when it comes to pacing is the idea that they get more interesting material to work on.
Yes, that would be my major motivator, yes.
When it comes to a high school classroom, and especially what I've seen in a college class, because again, I did my senior project, I worked with a professor here at Black Hills State University that taught in a paced environment, and her motivating factor was, okay, this is a 4 days a week class, like a Monday, Wednesday, or Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, something like that. Basically, students had to be in the classroom 4 days a week. Her motivating factor was, okay, there is a minimum amount of work that needs to be done by Friday. If you meet that minimum amount of work by Thursday, you don't need to come to class on Friday. And she said that was a huge motivating factor. And again, you can't do that for a middle school or even high school level, but at the college level, the motivating factor that came with pacing was, okay, if I get my stuff done, then I get to take a day off.
But in certain schools, in high school, you could create an environment where a kid could finish a class early. I know that there is a few schools in South Dakota that were playing around with this idea of you have a set amount of standards in Algebra 1, and when you finish the set amount of standards, you just get to start geometry. You don't have to wait till the end of the year. So there are situations where it would be possible to use that same college philosophy, even though you probably couldn't do the you get to skip class on Friday type of feeling.
Right. Okay, so then still in the concept of what motivates students, let's move into some of these other notes you had when it comes. Okay, one note you have here is just try something different. So what motivating topics did you have related to that? Just because I'm kind of reading our notes here, I'm going to throw it to you. What else were your thoughts on this?
If you're honest with your students about trying a new philosophy, a lot of times students love being in the pilot group of something that's new. Also, a huge motivator for kids is if you ask for and actually care about their feedback. So if you're trying a new game, or you're trying a new project, or you're trying a new reward, one of the best things you can do is just simply ask your kids, like, are you more motivated about this than this? I do a ton of small feedback surveys. The thing I have to be very careful of, and I tell my kids this, I try to listen to all their feedback, but there's some feedback things that I just can't do. And I used an example last year as I asked the kids the question. I said, if we could only do one thing, if we could only do pacing, or if we could only do level, or if we could only do choice, which of those three would you choose? And the answer was literally like 34, 32, 33. And I showed it to the kids, and I said, this is why sometimes it feels like you give me feedback and I have to ignore it, because I'm getting really strong feedback that goes in the other directions. I also want to put, though, that especially middle schoolers sometimes can be sharks. If you are doing something that's stressing you out and wearing you out, sometimes those kids are not going to be on your team. They could make your life a little bit more difficult, especially if you're creating a system that's making them be more independent, because for a student that will feel like a punishment at first.
So you're saying, you're trying something new. It's not working perfectly, but it's not working great. You're saying that in some aspects, kids might love it. They love being in on, I don't want to say in on the joke. They love being in on the idea of doing something new. But in other aspects, they could be like, see, why are we doing this? I like doing the old way. This is terrible. Just start jumping on you and just start.
Oh, yeah. And their parents sometimes are part of the problem. I've had lots of kids who like my system, describe the system to their parents, and their parents have the immediate reaction of, well, I learned math so-and-so way, and I'm just fine. Like, I've heard that so many times. I say the truth is, though, like, what I'm trying to do is create a system that's equally motivating for everybody, which is impossible. But how many people have stories about sitting in a math classroom and just being bored out of their mind? Like, everybody has a story like that. Is it possible to create an environment that's a little bit more motivating? I think that's worth the risk.
Right. And so we're going to slowly transition to the next topic of what does not motivate students. But there's one last part here that I think kind of fits into both aspects, what does and what doesn't motivate students. And that is, where do grades play a role? Because in my thought, or from my perspective, as a student who wanted to be a high achiever, who wanted high grades, who wanted to be, top of the class in certain aspects, grades were a huge motivating factor. So I liked it in that aspect, because I see, they got a 95%, I want 96% type of thing. So it motivated me in that aspect. But on the other hand, it's grades in theory should not be a motivating factor. Like you say all the time, school is not a competitive sport. It's not meant to be, I want to be better than you. So that's where I feel like grades can be a motivator, but also shouldn't be a motivator. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, and actually this is interesting because Will doesn't know this, but I used to use Will as an example at my presentations all the time. I would talk about how my first year of teaching, I would have this group of kids, and Will's class was a great group. A lot of hardworking kids in that room. I would give a quiz, and I would get a huge wide array of scores, right? You get the hundreds, you get the 90s, you get the 50s, and you get all over the place. And you know, that's a pretty normal environment. But I would talk about the example of, and I wouldn't use him by name, but Will would always do well on my assessments. But the truth is, Will was going to do well on any assessment that I gave him. My classroom wasn't necessarily the reason why he was successful. The reason why he was successful is because he's intrinsically motivated to work hard and get better. So then by creating an environment that maybe catches a few more kids on the side is beneficial. So I think teachers fall into the trap a lot, and I'm guilty of this as well, is most of us liked school. We went through school, we enjoyed school, we were good at school, we were successful. Will and I both had parents who were teachers and saw that impact on the family, so we have good experiences with school as a whole. Those kids are not necessarily the goal or the focus. A lot of times, the kids that we're trying to get are the ones who have the horrible stories about school, or they have the horrible experiences, or failed math last year. Those are the ones that maybe we can pull along for the ride just a little bit more. So that's my thought, is that I agree. I think grades can be really motivating, but I don't think we as teachers have to do anything to make them more motivating.
Right. I get that. And I mean, yeah, like you said, you could talk about the horror stories of students who just don't have great home lives. And I mean, I'm sitting in a classroom right now. This semester I've spent 45 hours in a classroom for one of my classes, and I'm just seeing that point blank. I mean, this student sits right next to the teacher, and this teacher that I'm with, great teacher, he's pretty much said, I've had this girl for several years now. I'm at the point where I'm almost giving up on her because she's not motivating. She's not motivated. Her parents aren't going to be motivating factors. I just don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to reach this kid at this point. It's terribly sad, and unfortunately, as teachers, we're going to have to deal with those situations quite often, unfortunately.
Well, and I think as a high school teacher as well, especially high school math, because that's the one that has the stigma. Math is a very unique subject that kids walk in the door and can say, I hate you, I hate your class, and I'm going to hate the class all year. And, you're like, hi, my name is Mr. Schmidt, it's nice to meet you. It's just like, I'd like to think of it as like the Facebook memeing of what math is, right? Like people have jokes all the time that you see online that are like, where in the world am I going to buy 376 cantaloupes, right? Like coming up with real world applications is incredibly important. And if you come up with false applications, the kids are going to see through that immediately. And I think high school math is where it's hardest, because in middle school math, I would say there's almost every skill I teach. When a kid asks, where am I going to use this? I can have a real, genuine answer where every kid in the classroom could use that skill. High school math was much harder. You brought up like some of the side angle side theorems like that. Those are really tough if you're not in a very specific job area. So when you come up with those real projects that are supposed to be motivating, or you come up with these story problems that are supposed to be real world applicable, the kid needs to really genuinely feel that they're going to use it. And sometimes they're just not. And that's really difficult.
And I love what you just said there, finding problems that actually are real world problems and not just practice problems that just throw in 300 cantaloupe. When am I ever going to buy 300 cantaloupe? In one of my classes, we actually have to do a workshop through Robert Kaplinski. Recognize that name?
No, I do not, sadly. I should, though.
He works with Dan Meyer and a lot of things, and I'm okay. Yeah, so yeah, basically another Dan Meyer. And part of this workshop was they mentioned the concept of creating, when you're doing projects, make actual applicable projects and problems, not just here's an exercise, let's throw some words behind each number and call it good. The example that they gave was a lot of problems you'll see in a math textbook is something like, I am building a fence. I want it to have, 360 square feet of area. What can the dimensions be? And as a student, I'm looking at that like, I'm not going to build whether it's a kennel for my dog, whether it's a cattle yard, I'm not going to know the area before I build it. But then he was like, so that's not a real motivating problem. That's just, okay, that's just putting words behind an exercise. A real problem would be, I have $100 to spend on material. What material can I buy to make the dimensions of this? So I agree. When it comes to problems, they have to be true problems that students can't just see through. Like, when am I ever going to use this? Make the problems actual things that they might use. And like you said, a lot easier said than done. But that was just something that really linked well with what we're learning in one of my classes.
No, and if you have the chance, Dan Meyer's TED Talk is great and goes into incredible detail with some of those examples. But I had two quick thoughts. First of all, you're absolutely correct about the real-world applications are hard. What's also problematic, though, is it turns out most of the time the real-world application is an easier version of the problem than the grade-level expectation in a high school math classroom. There are so many examples of the real-world application being a low-level problem that you would actually ask the kids to do. So by creating a real-world project or example or problem, sometimes you're lowering the rigor. And you have to be very careful to make sure that you create the same difficulties that you have in real life. So I loved your example of the budgeting aspect. So it's no longer just, applications of min-max. Now we have the budgeting that's built in as well, and that makes it more difficult. It keeps the rigor up, keeps it real world. And a personal example is, so I try to take pictures of real world problems because that immediately solves the issue. If you actually take a picture of what you're telling the kids is a real world application, you have proof. So I was on a boat with my wife out to Isle of Ho, which is part of Acadia National Park up here in Maine. We had to take a boat for about an hour and a half to get to the island. And as I'm sitting on the boat, I lean back and I see a picture that shows an application of a rope being thrown to someone who's drowning off the boat. It's one of those safety ropes. But they literally have the Pythagorean theorem drawn on this picture to show how long the rope needs to be, because there's multiple rope options in the box. So I just took a picture of it immediately. I look like the world's biggest weirdo. But I'm like, I need this picture because this is absolute proof to my kids of when they could use the Pythagorean theorem. And it works even better because I took a picture 2 hours away from where they live. So if you can do that as a teacher, it's an immediate win.
That's great. Yeah. So I feel like we could probably keep talking about motivation with students for hours and hours, but we wanted to, for the third main topic here, we wanted to get into what motivates teachers. So, obviously we're both gonna have our own perspective on it. So personally, I'll just throw out my motivating factor as wanting to go into teaching, wanting to go into education myself. You mentioned it. My mom is a teacher. I have a bunch of family members who are in education, and me just personally, what motivates me, or at least at this time period in my life, maybe it might change 10, 15, 20 years down the road, but this point in my life, the motivating factor for me is the idea of working with students, working with kids. That is something that is huge for me. I just enjoy being around kids and working with them. I mean, I'm also going into coaching, so I've already gotten a little bit of experience in that aspect. Just in a quick nutshell, that is what motivates me personally. What are your thoughts? Hit us with what motivates you as a teacher. What gets you to wake up and be excited in the morning?
Well, before we get there, I'm actually going to give an example. So the question of what motivates teachers, I remember I was in a college class once, and they were going through interview questions, and that was one of the most, you'll get that interview question every time in a teaching interview. Why do you want to be a teacher? And I remember being in the room and hearing a million good answers, right? Like for me, my answer is I love the difficulty of it. That's why I want to teach middle school math. I like having a job that I have to go to school today because my students are going to get a lower quality of education if I'm not there. And that need to help my kids, and that I just have to be there for them, for me is my motivating factor. So you hear that a lot. You hear your example of just being genuinely enjoying the time working with kids. Coaching is a huge motivating factor. I was in the room and somebody answered the summers, which is literally the only wrong answer that you can give for that problem. But I think every teacher that is good and passionate about their job has some genuinely motivating reason to be in the building, right? They want to be there to help their kids, to help their students. Honestly, there's not a lot of other reasons to be a teacher. It's not like you're getting paid, bucket loads of money. It's you have to really enjoy your job. But what I wanted to talk about here, and this is going to be an interesting one for you because you haven't been exposed to it yet, professional development can be viewed as a massive waste of time. And a lot of teachers just want to be able to work with their kids and to create content for their kids. That's what they want. And many professional development things, especially if they're those new thing that the state is requiring you to do, that's always something people talk about, can be viewed rather negatively. And you have not had the joy yet, but I want you to do this. During staff meetings or professional development, watch the teachers in the room. Because as it turns out, we as educators become exactly like our students at the first possible moment. People are on their phones, they're on their computers, they're talking to each other, they're not looking at the speaker, they're not paying attention. They've decided that this is a waste of their time before they begin. A lot of those same difficulties that we have with our kids is really interesting during professional development. And
here's my thought on that. So those teachers that are bored in professional development days. They're just on their phone. They have no care. They would rather be anywhere in the world but there. Is there reason for tuning out? Is it because, how do I want to put this? Is it because, one, they just generally don't want to be there, they aren't interested in getting better as teachers? Or is it the idea that we're being required to learn stuff that is being taught to us in theory, but we know it will not work in practice? I've mentioned several ideas to the teachers at the school I'm with right now. I said, oh yeah, my professors say try doing something like this, and their immediate response is, they're professors at college. That works in theory, it doesn't work in practice. So are teachers demotivated at PD days because they're like, this isn't going to actually work, I have no reason for learning this? Or is it just genuinely bad teachers that just don't want to get better?
I really don't think it's the bad teachers example. I really don't. I genuinely believe that it's a incredible skepticism of the professional development they're sitting in. Because the truth is, every single teacher has been in a professional development that is a massive waste of their time. They have been. The thing that I think is difficult, and where some teachers need to take, a hard look in the mirror, is your student would never be able to make up their mind about your class this way. I think that there are times when teachers have been burned too many times before, and they're not willing to give this presentation a chance. Your example of, well, they're a college professor that works in theory, doesn't work in practice. They might be right, but the inevitable follow-up question is, when was the last time you tried? Right? And so I cannot tell you how many times people will tell me that things that I already do in my classroom are not possible. And then the counter argument happens, and this is going to happen to you, is it takes a massive amount of time and effort to teach in a customized environment. Teachers who do it and are able to do it for long term are incredible troopers, but it takes so much energy. And a lot of times people will walk in, and I know at my old school it would happen where people are like, well, Schmidt does it that way, but that's not really a good solution, because they knew the hours that you put in. And I think you're going to have that same problem. Well, Will does it this way, and that works for him, but it's not going to work for me. And so I think what teachers need to be motivated is, first of all, they need to be involved in the process. How many PDs do people actually ask the teachers, like, what do you guys want to be learning about in professional development today? The sad truth is it's not many. They also need to be able to give feedback, just like their students want to be able to give feedback. The question becomes, like, how was the PD today? Was it really good? The one we had as our staff at the beginning of the year was amazing. It was a super good PD, and I wanted to tell the administration that do more of this type of thing, but there was no feedback mechanism to tell anybody. And so I think that teachers just want to be involved in that process, to be actually doing professional development that's worthwhile. And I think the reason why I believe that is, if you see a good professional development, those teachers who have been displaying that, student-like behavior change immediately. They do. They become super motivated instantly, and they want to incorporate what they're being shown.
So it comes down to what motivates teachers not only to want to go to school, but to get better. It sounds like you're saying comes down to be genuinely interested and think that what they're being taught will be useful and applicable to them. I hear teachers all the time saying, oh, I got to take 2-3 credits worth of classes this summer. It's going to be terrible. Like, well, they aren't motivated because I imagine going into those classes, they're thinking this is going to be useless to me. Now, if they were learning about something, if they're taking 2 to 3 credits on something that's just, they're excited about, they'd probably say, hey, I get to take a class this. You very rarely hear somebody say, I get to take a class this summer, but you would hope that would be the aspect, because again, that comes back to, as professional teachers, we are responsible for developing ourselves. So
yeah, and I think that a lot of times the best professional development is teacher to teacher. If you have the opportunity to do like the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, something like that, those are great professional development opportunities. Being able to sit with another teacher in a room and that teacher says, here's this really cool idea that I have, those are some of the best opportunities that you'll get. And those are truly motivating to educators. They really are.
A lot of good stuff there. Now we just want to roll into our last topic of the day, the something I can't stop thinking about. And this thing that I can't stop thinking about, Mr. Schmidt, Josh, you will probably either love it or hate it. I'm assuming you're going to hate it as the tortured Minnesota sports fan that you are.
I think it's an interesting topic.
I wanted to talk about the Jimmy Butler demanding a trade from the Timberwolves. Now, anybody that's listening to this, I guarantee you he is probably already either traded or he's hit free agency or whatever. We are recording this in October of 2018. So at this very moment, Jimmy Butler is demanding a trade, and I just wanted to talk about the aspects, the big picture of NBA players demanding trades, but not only demanding trades, demanding them to specific teams. So before we get into the macro conversation, Josh, micro conversation, tell me why Minnesota is screwing this up again.
Okay, so that's a really broad question. So the issue here is they have a star player, Karl Anthony Towns, who is a career Minnesota guy. He should be. He should never leave the state of Minnesota ever again because he might not come back. They have a player, Andrew Wiggins, who does not mesh well with Jimmy Butler at all. But Andrew Wiggins is locked up for 5 years on a contract that is not tradable. That's reality. Those are the corner pieces of this organization moving forward. And the third player in that is Jimmy Butler, who does not like the two most important players on the team. And so they are screwing this up because they have created an environment where their two most important players do not feel like they're being valued. And instead you have Jimmy Butler, who literally just ran a practice yesterday and had an interview on ESPN an hour later trashing the people in the practice. It's a mess. It is a ridiculously Minnesota thing that's going on. And the season starts in a week, and I am about to weep uncontrollably. I just can't do it. I can't handle it.
So T-Wolves in a nutshell, then.
Yeah, it really is. It's the Timberwolves since seriously, this is their first playoff appearance since I was in high school. It's been a rough road for a long time.
Okay, so that is the small picture of what's going on. I want to talk about, again, the big picture of it's just blowing my mind. All these players that are just demanding trades to specific teams. You've seen it with Kawhi insisted on being in LA, whether it was the Lakers or Clippers, he wanted to be in LA. The Spurs, just being the strong arm organization they are, they sent him somewhere else. Now you have Jimmy Butler saying it started with the Knicks and the Clippers. Now he's saying he wants to be in Miami. It just blows my mind that we are now in an NBA where players can, I heard the phrase, I think I heard it on the Bill Simmons podcast, they're in their pre-agency. It's a couple of years before they're free agents, and in their pre-agency time, they are making demands because they can strong-arm the organization. I have a theory on where this came about, but I just want to hear your thoughts on it. Where do you think this started and came from?
I blame Twitter, 100%. The NBA is different than any other sports league in the world because the players themselves are brands. And this is not an NFL team where the quarterback is making millions upon millions of dollars in endorsements. This is everybody in that starting five has a shoe deal, is probably doing commercials, and they themselves are brands. When LeBron left Cleveland, there were reports that the value of the Cleveland basketball team dropped nearly $100 million. I could be making that stat up off the top of my head. But the value of the organization dropped drastically for one player leaving. That is so different than any other sports league. And I think that happened because the players themselves communicate closer to their fans and have communicated closer to their fans for years through Twitter. And so I think that the issue of a player having so much power goes back to Twitter and the ability of a player to be a brand in a way that they cannot be in any other sport.
I agree with it in that aspect. I wasn't going to mention that part of it, but I agree that's definitely probably part of it. My thought was, and again, it goes back to LeBron leaving Cleveland. Everybody after that was complaining, oh my God, he left Cleveland. He knew he was going to leave Cleveland. Why didn't he give them a heads up? Because now, like you said, they just lost a generational player, and their organization loses $100 million in value. And then they became the Cavaliers post LeBron that had the fewest wins in that 4-year span. So I blame it back to people blaming the player for not giving the organization a heads up. Like, the players have the right to move, obviously.
Absolutely.
But now they feel like if they're like Kevin Durant and leave without giving the team the heads up, then they're painted as the bad guy for saying, well, why didn't you let us know? We could have traded you, and at least we could have got something back for it. So that's just where I think it's coming from. The players are saying, hey, I don't want to be in Minnesota. Who wants to be in Minnesota? I don't want to be in Minnesota.
It kills me.
Get rid of, trade me away. Get something for me now, or else I'm leaving next year and you're getting nothing for me. And that's kind of where I see it happening, or where I think it's coming from.
And I don't blame the player for requesting a trade. I don't. I think what's unique about the NBA right now is players get to request a trade to the market of their choice, which is very different. I think it is well within a player's right to hold out. It is well within a player's right to demand a trade. It is well within a player's right to not go to practice and pay fines. All of those things are acceptable to me. What's very weird, though, is that an NBA player has this incredible power to demand a trade to a specific place without a no-trade clause. That's not really a big thing. They have trade kickers in the NBA salary cap. But it is very difficult for a player to build in a no-trade clause to their contract. So Jimmy will not get traded to any team that he doesn't want to go to, because he'll just say, well, I'm not going to re-sign with you next year. And the trade is off. It's crazy to me.
And it is mind-blowing. And then the part of me goes back to the Paul George situation. I mean, I'm a huge Oklahoma City Thunder fan, so I've just been a bitter NBA fan for the last 3 years, much like the Timberwolves. Only we have a guy that wants to be there.
That's very true.
They took the gamble. I mean, they were the team that was saying, okay, Paul George is up in a year. We're going to gamble, and we're going to trade for him, and we're going to see if we can convince him to stay. And somehow it worked. Like, when I seen he re-signed with them, I remember, like, it was just the weirdest feeling of elation and what is wrong with it? Like, why?
Right. I had the exact same reaction. Like, I think small market teams, I always root for other small market teams. I was so genuinely surprised and happy that he re-signed with OKC, because I think that's one thing that's hurting the NBA right now, is that the Golden State Warriors are so insanely good that you have to resort to the exact same tactics in order to have any chance. So if you are not a super team with multiple superstars, you have no shot for the next 3 to 5 years, period. And I think that actually makes... I thought the NBA playoffs last year were super uninteresting after the Rockets lost. Like, the finals were probably the most boring series of the whole thing, because all of the power is in the Western Conference, which the playoffs were great in the Western Conference.
Minus J.R. Smith for getting the score for a half a second.
Oh my God, I can't even believe that. That was ridiculous.
But anyway, so yeah, I just wanted to talk on that. And again, now you see the Raptors taking that exact same gamble. And the only teams you'll see taking those gambles are, we think we're close. I don't know what the Raptors are thinking, because God knows they're not close. But they think they're close enough.
I can see it happening.
Yeah? Tell that to your...
my students with the Celtics. Oh, I do. I tell them all the time. It is so. But
fun. Anyway, yeah. So the only teams you'll see, like Jimmy Butler wants to go to the Heat. The only teams that you would see taking a swing at Jimmy Butler right now that aren't the Heat are teams that think they're close. And I mean, right now I haven't heard anything else, just because everybody agrees we're not close to the Warriors right now. Why give up our future for somebody that's not really going to help?
Well, and I had one other thought on this. and this is for you specifically, so the first three teams that he listed were Knicks, Nets, and Clippers. None of those teams are close. What do you think that says about him as a player, that he didn't want to go to a winning team at first, and he is now willing to go to the Heat? Do you think that says something about his demeanor as a player and him wanting to be a leader rather than a follower?
My initial reaction, wait, are you saying being a leader at a terrible team?
It seems like to me he'd rather be leading a bad team, than winning as the second fiddle.
He would rather be Giannis in Milwaukee than Klay Thompson in
It's
Golden
what it
State.
seems like. Why would he ask to go to the Nets?
And I agree. I think people have gotten to the point where, again, the Warriors have just made the league crazy. They know nobody's winning the title this year except for the Warriors. And if they can get everybody to re-sign, nobody is winning the title until the Warriors break up. So I think players are in the mode right now. I'm not going to win. I want to be somewhere where I'm going to enjoy life. And that's just my thought. But anyway, we're this was easily the longest one we've done so far, which is a good thing because, I loved today's conversation. We touched on a lot of great things, especially how terrible the T-Wolves are. But anyway, keeping that in mind, that is the thing that I can't stop thinking about is players demanding trades to specific teams. And again, I can't stop thinking about it. I don't know why, just because I feel like we spent 5 minutes on it and we fleshed it out from just about every single possible point, but I still just can't get it off my mind.
I'm with you. It's mind-boggling to me.
But anyway, that in mind, Josh, thanks for a great episode. We'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely. Take it easy.